I know this sounds crazy, all right, but I'm just telling you what I saw. It's about 5:30, 20 to 6 in the evening, and I was out here and I noticed this wavy looking thing above the trees over here on the right. And I kept thinking, what is that? And I thought it was some type of weather phenomenon. And it moves forward and it stops between the crepe myrtle tree out here and the wood line. And then it pulls forward on this side, right between there. And all of a sudden, there is an alien appearing in front of the crepe myrtle tree. He had a human body, but he had a creature's head. Now, I didn't tell anybody about E.T., nobody even that lived in my home. And I noticed that there was a sighting of a UFO over on Conway, and I thought, I bet that's him. That's when I connected with MUFON because they actually had covered that story, and I went ahead and finally told my story.
Through the Mutual UFO Network, we systematically investigate reports of UFO sightings, of UFO landings.
There are all kinds of people within this community, from every point in the spectrum, from people who believe that aliens inseminated humans to people who saw something that they truly believe was a UFO or an alien or whatever it is.
So besides what Jeff is going to show you here today, if you're really interested in crop circles, that would be a good meeting to come to.
In cases like these with the balls of light with on-site witnesses seeing them being made, that's beyond question. But there's so many cases that are not.
MUFON actually keeps pretty detailed records of the UFO sightings that are reported every year. And for the past decade in Florida, that number has fluctuated between as little as 105 sightings in 2007 to as many as 588 in 2015.
That sudden spike in occurrences was making the authorities nervous. They didn't know what was going on. They couldn't explain it. And they hated the fact that everybody knew about it. They've been trying, we were still in the days when they were trying to keep a lid on all this stuff.
But there is a degree of skepticism within this community. And they do try to study these reports and try to find some explanation.
Most of the time you can close these in 3 or 4 days. Go through the weather, you go through media reports, you go through air traffic. Now, if it's around Orlando, that makes it difficult because Orlando, looks like this pile up of planes most of the time. I had a lady that was really upset that this UFO kept going over her house every once in a while, and it was the International Space Station.
Here on the Space Coast, a lot of them are former scientists, former employees with NASA, Lockheed Martin. A lot of them worked on projects, and they'll speak at these meetings and sort of debunk some of the long-standing UFO claims.
The investigation of this kind of experience has to be done more as a court case. I was 13 years old when my aunt Betty Hill phoned my childhood home, and she was telling my mother about a UFO that she and my uncle had observed in the White Mountains the previous evening. I saw the evidence. I saw the impact that this had had on my uncle. He had all of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. This is the sketch that Barney drew of what he observed, and he drew this on September 20th, 1961. Betty and Barney had the first case scientifically investigated in the United States. Starting in the late 1960s, other people started coming forward who were having the same kind of experiences. It was circular craft, oval-shaped craft, silent. Sometimes they would hover over a vehicle with people inside the car. A beam would shoot down into that vehicle, and the next thing they knew, the vehicle itself would be lifted into the air. We had many, many, many cases.
So over time, science has always been very skeptical of UFO phenomenon, UFO claims, UFO reports, and they have good reason for it.
One of the difficulties is the UFO believer community has not come up with any evidence in which scientists and researchers can reach a consensus that indeed this is happening, that we are being visited by extraterrestrials.
Often people don't take pictures or the photos. It's difficult to determine what it is. It's very blurry. The videos can be doctored.
An individual may have witnessed something and believe very firmly that their explanation is the one and only true explanation. And they get confirmation bias, or I should say confirmation support, when they are members of a UFO believers community. It's more or less like being in an echo chamber where everyone is reaffirming that yes, UFOs exist and that they have been observed, and perhaps some people have even been in contact with extraterrestrials.
We're not people who say, well, we believe everything that you tell us. We believe that you really did see this. We have to look into it. And there is a lot of scientific evidence that, again, has been covered up. Project Blue Book is the largest study ever done by the U.S. government into UFOs. This was published in 1955 after there was a scientific investigation of 3,201 UFO sightings, and many of these were close encounters.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States.
They attempted to categorize all of these different sightings, giving common explanations to them.
We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, as erroneously identified friendly aircraft, as meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberrations.
I think that from the start, from Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book, all of the government has spent its time doing is debunking. There wasn't any investigation, it was debunking.
And people do not like it when the truth is being covered up. And so the reports continued to be made to private groups, such as the Mutual UFO Network.
This is something that is not cute, gray, little. He had extremely strong jawbones, very pronounced. That was actually one of the first things I noticed. His eyes stuck way out of their sockets. And he only took maybe 3 or 4 steps forward, and he grabbed onto a pole and he started to climb. And as he started to climb, he stops and then he swings around, and he stared right at me. And at that point, I was pretty scared, to be honest with you. I thought I'm in trouble. And MUFON told me to put up the hunting trackers. This one faces the ET tree, all right? And it also will catch a little bit of the sky up there. I look at them every 24 hours. And then over here, this one is my newest one. It's gonna take that opening right there.
So there has not been anything quite substantial enough for scientists to really get behind this idea. And that's sort of been the challenge over and over and over again. We are starting to see scientists and professionals start to accept the possibility of looking into these reports and maybe incorporating some of that data as they do their research.
I absolutely do think that there is a shift, that people are giving more credence to this than they did in the past. And I think that it began on December 16, 2017, when the New York Times carried a very important article about the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program.
And it was really focused on, again, looking at UFOs or claims of UFO sightings by military personnel and determining if there was any truth or anything behind that.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. Oh my gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing. It's rotating.
following that, Harvard scientist Avi Loeb, he is the chairman of Harvard University's astronomy department, a very respected and renowned scientist, came out with a very controversial theory late last year. And it referred to an interstellar object called Oumuamua, which was spotted sort of traversing the solar system. And he studied it and determined, I can't explain what this is. The only thing I could perhaps use as an explanation for what this object is, the way that it's moving, is that it has an extraterrestrial origin. So when he came out with that, it was very controversial. A lot of scientists denounced it, saying maybe he was looking for attention.
The public tends to be highly skeptical of ETs, of UFO sightings and alien abductions. And it's hard to conclude from that unusual shape, especially because it's at such a great distance from Earth, that it's a sign of extraterrestrials. It's very difficult to come to that conclusion for most scientists.
I don't think it's something that they're going to bring out into the public. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, for panic, especially if they look like that alien that was in my backyard.
Something's up there, something's flashing through. Is it the government? Quite possibly. Or it could be something else that the government's afraid of.
So it's just something that I think that is interesting. I went through a lot psychologically trying to deal with what I saw, and he might have been a nice alien. Yeah. But if that was his happy face, then we've got real problems, I can tell you that.